Welcome, everybody, to the show. Joining me is our contemporary colleague and fellow traveler, the Dan Noodles man, the Buddy Ebsen of Wargaming this week. And joining me is our I don't prepare these in advance, clearly. And sometimes they just boom and out it comes, and sometimes they don't. Joining us also is our very special guest, Volko Ruhnke. Volko, thanks for stopping by.
Happy to be here. Thanks, guys.
Despite your internet is not as shaky today, but you're still here.
We'll see. So it's moody, let's say.
All right, temperamental.
Volko, let me take this opportunity to say you look marvelous.
Well, Dan, so do you.
Come on, Jesus.
You're looking tanned, rested, and ready.
No, man, I just got back from work. I work with a place where there's all women.
Sounds awful.
Joining us this evening also is Dan's new toilet.
Oh, Volko, did you hear about my new toilet?
I'm behind the times, my friend.
Well, we had to cut the main flow of water into our house in our basement because it would flood all the time. Okay.
Yeah.
Because we live right next to a river, so we had to buy a special type of toilet. The throne cost me $1,500.
But it was worth it.
Well, I mean, it hasn't flooded yet. I mean, we haven't had any torrential rains for it to flood. But I mean, look, if ever you come down, man, you're welcome to try it.
I look forward to that moment.
No problem.
You stop talking about the toilet yet? Anyway,
oh, man.
Somebody asked for this. So anyway, thank you for putting up with our frivolous nonsense. Anyway, I want to talk about unconventional war games. And you know, you're it's got a natural name that would come up in the context of unconventional war games. How does one go about thinking outside the conventional war game box?
And why? Why?
Do you, well, let me, since this is hitting me fresh, this question, do you mean, I don't mean to be difficult here, but do you mean war games that are unconventional in design or topic, or do you mean games about unconventional warfare?
I actually mean games that are unconventionally designed.
Okay.
Hold on. That's very interesting. Volko, elaborate on unconventional warfare. What do you mean?
You know, we think of conventional warfare, World War II, nation states form armies and fleets and go after each other. That's conventional warfare. And in between all that, actually much more frequent, but maybe not as high on the historical radar, we have unconventional or irregular warfare. It might be internal wars, civil wars, rebellions, guerrilla fighting. Low intensity conflict is a modern phrase for this kind of goings on. So if we think about insurgency and counterinsurgency, a lot of that is unconventional warfare. And of course, I've done some games about that.
That's funny. It's funny that you say Civil War unconventional.
Civil wars can be very unconventional. Ours wasn't so much. A little bit.
Well, ours wasn't so much. I mean, you think about Bleeding Kansas, right? That's irregular warfare within a context of a civil war. The Army of the Potomac and the Army of Northern Virginia going after each other, that's conventional warfare of the day. So it's not that civil war means one or the other, but very often, and certainly in the 20th century that this was true, and I think in the modern times as well, if you have an internal civil conflict, you know, it tends to start out small. There's one weak force and a strong government, and it's kind of bubbling along. And so you've got small unit actions. And because the two sides don't both have the capacity right away, at least, to form a conventional army or fleet, right, to go after each other. And so they're doing this low level stuff in hopes that they attrit the enemy to later on be able to field a conventional force. And, you know, just as Ho Chi Minh's army did, eventually conventionally charge into Saigon with your armored forces.
Would you say Bay of Pigs would be an unconventional type of warfare?
Yeah, I would. I mean, the intent there was, you know, that was not that this particular Cuban brigade was on its own, right, gonna conventionally fight its way to advance. At least I hope not, because that seems quite Don Quixote, right? But rather that landing and would start a revolution, a movement, with people being fed up with Castro's regime joining in the fight. And that's, by the way, exactly the tactics that Castro and Che Guevara used to win the Cuban Revolution, right? It's actually a theory of insurgency that Guevara is associated with, called Foco theory, F-O-C-O, Foco theory. And the theory is that if the state is weak enough and the people are unhappy enough, you just need some dramatic military action, a punch, something spectacular to wake people.
Have an uprising,
yeah, rise up with us. You can fight and you can do it, and that worked in Cuba. And then, of course, Guevara tried to apply that in Africa and in Bolivia, and it didn't work at all.
Went very poorly for him personally, in fact.
I mean, the CIA at that time should have let Sam Jiang, the mobster there. You should have let him do the war. It would have won. But anyways, let's not talk about that.
I mean, and when you say you, of course, I wasn't born.
For God's
Neither
sake.
was I, fortunately.
What was it, 61?
61. Well, Kennedy.
Well,
so yeah, something like that.
Oh, Bay of Pigs, yeah, something like that.
Sam Giancana. That's it.
Right, Dan being our resident expert on that and mushrooms. So that wasn't my thought to think about unconventional conflicts, although you're the totally unnatural person to have on for that too. But if we did that, I probably want Brian Train on as well, who we've also had on, and I think we've had both of you together at one point too. But I guess we'll ask stacking limits question, since I think we could take whatever answer you give us, even if it's non-committal, as definitive here. Are coin games card-driven games?
Yeah, and so sorry to retreat to definitions and semantics, but if it's card-driven games with a lowercase CD, then I would say yes. And if you mean CDG, capital C, capital D, capital G, I'd say no. So, and what do I mean by that distinction? There's something we know in the hobby as CDGs that are different implementations of Mark Herman's original We the People, and they use cards, and specifically event cards and operations that event cards drive in a particular way. My design Wilderness War is definitely a CDG. My design Labyrinth War and Terror, definitely a CDG in that sense. But as we went on in the development of that form, it inspired a lot of other things. That there's cards in it. Cards are driving action, but they're doing it in rather different ways. And I would say that the coin series uses cards, event cards, and operations menus in a different enough way from We the People and other classic CDGs that I would not consider it a classic CDG, capital CDG, even though cards driving the action are a very important part of play in that system.
Well, that is a semantically robust answer. And as you know,
I am nothing if not semantically robust.
We love semantics here in this hobby.
I have a personal question, Volko, if you don't mind. I mean,
you can ask. He doesn't have to answer.
I understand. Why? I'm sure you enjoy designing your own games.
On the button.
Is that right? Because I'm sure you wouldn't design a game that you don't enjoy. It would just be boring, right? And we've tried and all that.
100%.
So why are you so different? It's like you want to shake up the goddamn industry. You're pissing off a lot of people, Volko.
Am I really pissing off anybody?
No, I don't know, but
they haven't.
That groundswell of anger has yet to materialize in my presence.
But it's nice to be talked about, I guess. No,
but the thing is that you're
next time I'm going to put this on. I'm going to put on the thumbnail with Volko Ruhnke, the most hated man in wargaming. How about that?
But Volko, you are so different, and you're coming out with new. I'm not even going to say new designs. You're coming out with new mechanics, new Whoever thought about that? I'm having a hard time putting it into words, but you know what I'm trying to say, Volko.
Well, let me try and frame this, because this is actually kind of similar to my thinking of setting a topic for tonight. Actually, was you've kind of, if I seem lavish here, I don't apologize at all. You've kind of revolutionized the way we think about wargame designs twice, and I don't know that anybody else has done it twice.
No.
You know what I'm saying? So once with coin and once with, there's a transition there into coin between, in the designs, I think we could see between Wilderness War and Labyrinth and coin. But then Levy Campaign just kind of comes out of poof, nowhere. And
thank you very much, Artie. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what was the actual question though, Dan?
The question is, why are you purposely wanting to be different, or is this really something? I have no idea. Do you want to be different or what?
Well, thanks for all those kind words. I take those as very, very generous thoughts on my behalf. Yes, I think I do. And it is because I want to design something that's interesting to me as a pursuit, as a design pursuit, and it will be fun for me to play. And going back to Wilderness War, which was, it was my first, I hadn't published it. I'd done some scenarios and done play testing and other little things like that, but I hadn't published any games. And the initial idea for me to even undertake that effort, encouraged by a buddy, was I really like this particular topic, the French and Indian War. I've been running paper campaigns, kind of role play type stuff in that world. I've done a lot of research, and none of the games that are out there, and there were several games out there already, at that time, the year 2000, on the French Indian War, none of the games out there do everything I want them to do. And so, and my friend just said, well, then, design one yourself, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair. Design the game that you would want to play. And what am I doing with that? I'm filling a gap. Now, that was a fairly small gap, right? It's not that topic hadn't been done. It's not that it hadn't been done well. It's just none of them did everything I wanted to do, but it's still filling a gap in the repertoire, see? And now if I expand from that and I look at all of, what am I interested in? Military history. And I look at all of military history. Well, we cluster in what we do in our hobby, right? Like there's a ton on Napoleon, and there's a ton on World War II, and so on. There's more on ancients than on medieval. There's actually, I think, arguably more on strategic or tactical than on operational. There's more on army maneuver than there is on logistics. There's more on conventional war than unconventional war. This is not because it's what's interesting to historians. It's not because it's what's consequential to the affairs of mankind. It's just tradition. It's just, we happen to start this hobby in the United States, not much, one generation after World War II. So we have a lot on the US in World War II, right? And we kind of continued on with that, which is fine as far as it goes. But if I'm going to, spend a lot of time obsessing over something for, a few years, like every day, I kind of feel like I want it to be something that fills in a little bit, rather than just trying to, take yet another look at Volko, the same campaign.
Volko, I don't think there was a gap to be filled. You just created a new segment.
The segment illuminates the gap, though, right? I mean, we talk about coin. Let's say unconventional warfare, right? There are relatively a few. There was a few games on unconventional warfare or unconventional conflicts, but very few. And in many cases, I would think the obvious example is the Nick Karp Vietnam game, which really struggles and kind of creates this giant edifice in order to simulate unconventional parts of that conflict, but hugely
influential on me. I mean, when I got that game, it's funny, it was 1984 that came out, right? And I had another buddy, and we wargamed all the time, and he actually said, we're always doing World War II, let's get something different, let's just get something different, and I was like, wow, there is, I guess you're right, there's other stuff too. And I saw that game, and I got so into Nick Karp's Vietnam. It was so exciting because it was like, I don't understand, I don't understand this world. I mean, the fact that I hadn't played a lot of games like that meant that specific design by Nick Karp, under Mark Herman's tutelage, by the way, fundamentally formed my impressions, my imagining of guerrilla warfare, which influenced a lot after that, right? And so why? Because Nick found a topic and a treatment that was not a conventional war game for 1984.
And Volko, where do you get, when you create a new system, let's say, okay, you have nothing to steal from anybody. It's a new system.
Oh no, that's not correct at all.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, there's a journalist of technology in Britain, and he has a phrase that all human innovation is ideas having sex. And what he means by that is no innovation is just whole cloth, nothing came before, everything is just thought up by one person.
Right.
All innovation is taking existing ideas, combining them in new ways, applying them to new purposes, and then when there's something that doesn't quite fit, turning it this way or coming up with maybe some new small thing that's brand new and fitting that in, right? And that's absolutely true of board game design. It's the same process, and it certainly is for me. So every single one of my designs, there's a rich genealogy in them of what I've stolen from other designers, for sure.
Okay.
So what you're saying is you're less of an egomaniac than Isaac Newton.
I mean,
even Newton acknowledged.
Newton also,
stood on the shoulders of giants.
Yes, exactly, right.
And,
sure,
and,
but that's
Newton
the way. Yeah, but
not
that's
a modest man.
This is the way we come forward. This is right in humanity.
I've been saying for a while that these things just don't show up ex nihilo, right? Where they just appear poof because somebody's a genius. Somebody's a genius, but they're a genius because they went and thought to combine existing things in new ways that we haven't seen before. So I mean, this makes
that's right.
Your answer here makes complete sense to me. But you're still, thinking outside the box. And again, to kind of keep referring to this same example of Nick Karp's Vietnam, right? If same designer were to approach that topic now, I think we'd end up with a very different design because the vocabulary 100%. Is so much richer now than we had in 1987.
Yeah,
right?
And when I teach game design, the term I use is toolbox, right? That a game designer might be doing research or have expertise in some setting or something like that, the dynamics of an actual human system or a fantasy world or whatever it is, right? But the game designer is a game designer also, or maybe even mainly, because that person has a toolbox of mechanics, of ways of translating, simulating, let's say real world dynamics into tabletop game mechanics, and giving that life in the players by making it engaging for players to interact and for communicating that system, that rule system to players, and so on and so on. All the things that make a board game that comes in a box something different than an idea that somebody has in their head, right? So that toolbox of game mechanics, absolutely true. For Nick Karp, I mean, he uses hexes and counters that have the combat strength and then the movement factor, and dice and combat results tables and terrain effects charts and so forth, right? So there's a lot of things there that were already very, very familiar to us in 1984, simply applied to a very different topic in new ways. So that was the innovation. It's typical. I mean, it's genius. It's a genius design, Vietnam 1965-75 by Nick Karp.
And everybody who's played it seems to agree with that.
Yeah.
Even those that struggled mightily with it.
And it absolutely is. You can see vividly, just look at it. It absolutely stands on the shoulders of giants.
So what are the challenge? You have one, Dan. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Artie.
So, what are the challenge if we are going to think unconventionally, regardless of how, right? Whether that's unconventional mechanics or unconventional topics or unconventional modes of conflict, what are the challenges to adopt, like player adoption, right? Or how does
Yeah.
one approach? I mean, Andy and Abyss is a great example, right? I mean, I was vaguely aware that there was fighting, but that's it. I mean, how do you, and the game became huge and spawned a thriving series, and that literally the publisher can't even keep up with. There's so much demand for these things. I mean, how does that even? How did you sell that? Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right that is a challenge because there's a market. And to go back to what I said originally, we have been in the wargaming hobby traditionalist to a large degree, looking at the same kind of topics and in a way the same toolbox of mechanics, right, over decades and decades and decades, right? And so why is that? Well, because these are, first of all, hard to learn and appeal because there's a certain audience that these topics appeal to, and there's a great payoff to riffing on a theme, right? And say, okay, we can do this a little bit different, or look at it from this side, or whatever, do it a little bigger, a little smaller, and so on. It makes complete sense in the market. And so now if we want to, accelerate the broadening or the innovation of that, we are fighting some market forces there in a small market, a specialist niche market that pretty much knows what it likes, right? And so, so we are up against that, the apocryphal Henry Ford, that if I had asked my customers, Henry Ford, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? So if we rely just on what we think people like, we may never innovate as much as they would like us to if they knew, right, what we could have done. There is that. And so we try. So if we build it, they will come, Well, not necessarily. And I've not always been successful in that myself. Andy and Abyss is a great example because for me, first of all, I knew the topic would be hard. And Gene is himself, he's quoted himself saying he didn't think he could sell Columbia. He just like, but it'll be a series, maybe it'll work, and it was slow. It was slow on P500. There's that. And it was slow because people weren't interested. The usual GMT audience, the people who pre-ordered GMT games or did so in 2012, were not interested in insurgency and counterinsurgency in Colombia, because that was one thing. The other aspect of it was mechanically. So I had always, GMT has this 1 to 9 complexity scale, and I was always kind of at a 4. And Gene said, I think Andy and Abyss is a 6. And I said, a 6? Oh, it's the same length rulebook. It was Wilderness War. How, why would it be a jump 2 to a 6? And he said, because it's so different. It's hard. There's a barrier to entry because it's not familiar mechanically. So that's also a problem. So what did I do? So first of all, by that time after Labyrinth, kind of accidentally, we realized that if you can offer Solitaire system in the box, you will get a bigger audience. So I thought I did it, kind of as best I could for Labyrinth because Gene wanted me to, because he didn't think anybody would want to play the bad guys, the terrorists. So we had to have a bot that you could fight against. So I did it in Labyrinth for 1 player simulated against a 1-player real. And I thought for any of this, I've got 4 players. Can I do that, what I did in Labyrinth? Can I provide non-player flowcharts for 3 different factions so that you can, if you want to, play it Solitaire as if you're playing multiplayer, but you're playing 3 different, flowcharts, right? So that went in the box to try to, lure some people. And then also I had the thought that it's already not something, insurgency in Colombia, it's already not something that's going to appeal to the usual audience, even for CDGs, big CDGs, right? Classic CDGs like Labyrinth. Maybe I can broaden the appeal, to get over this hump of newness, of unfamiliarity, by making the thing look like games that are more broadly popular. So hence we're going to have, wooden cubes and little wooden pieces, and hopefully easy to access play aids and area movement and bright colors as might be suitable for Colombia, in hopes that folks who aren't the usual GMT audience and aren't war gamers and aren't even CDG players might at least look familiar. So I could say, hey, you like playing games about, growing cabbages and running salt mines in medieval Europe and stuff like that. This is Insurgency in Colombia. It's also interesting, give it a try. And so all of that together, I guess none of that was a silver bullet, because it took a while to get to production, to get to enough acceptance. But ultimately it got there.
That's a really interesting response, because I hadn't thought of it as a game that physically maybe shouted out to more let's call them less niche-y and more conventional board games, right? I mean, I think that's true. Thinking about it, that literally never occurred to me before you mentioned it.
Yeah, that's the attempt anyway.
So, William Aarons, thank you so much for the support. It is much appreciated. And Volko, you're now being compared with Sergei Eisenstein. You could take that as a compliment, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, this is one difference I think that William refers to often between films and games, because I do see films and games as being similar as media that can, transport us potentially usefully and potentially abusively into different times and places in history or elsewhere. And of course, in the Eisenstein movie, the Teutons are Nazis, and they literally they're throwing babies into the flames and all this kind of thing, right? And the Russians under Prince Alexander are proletarian heroes, and as we might expect, history is more nuanced than that. And not to say that there necessarily are not good guys and bad guys in history. There certainly can be, but I do think war games tend to try to understand systems, right? They tend to try to show, how did military affairs work? How did this battle go down? It's more about that kind of technical analysis than it is open moralizing or even caricature of historical personalities, the way films often can be.
Volko, another question from me, totally left field. What drives you mostly? Does design or subject?
You mean mechanical design? Yeah. So, because to me, design of historical simulation games has to do with equally subject and mechanical expression, right? But for me, it's subject. How can I explore this subject, specifically this system, these dynamics that were going down in this setting in history? How can I explore those on the game table, right? That's the challenge. That's the drive. That's the research question, if you will, right? And so, what mechanics might do that? But I will say it goes back and forth. In that, it's a bit of chicken egg. For example, for Nevsky, I absolutely had a pre-existing interest in that particular setting, that conflict. I realized that medieval operational games were not as great in number as I liked. There are some great ones, but not as many out there as I wanted to play. But I did also start, and I don't know which was first, with the idea mechanically that the idea of the column cards in the game Angola, which is now an MMP game by Ragnar Brothers, was brilliant and uncopied and deserved to be copied, deserved to be used. And so a part of the germination of the idea for Nevsky was mechanical. Was what would be an appropriate setting where command and control is ragged, the communications aren't very good, or the trust among the different commanders is not there, or the hierarchy is informal. So then the marriage, the innovation, right, was okay. The idea is having sex, right, was we can take column cards from Angola and use that to show a medieval feudally based command structure, right? That would be a cool thing. And where might I want to do that? Well, I have a particular connection to that part of Europe. My father is from not too far away from there, and it's a cool movie. It's a cool setting. I'll do it.
Comes with its own built-in soundtrack, which is
yes, yes, which I can listen to, while I design and play. So that's going in both directions, and that happens a lot. Where I have, there's sort of like there's this toolbox sitting over here. I'm like, there's this great tool, and we haven't done enough with it. Yeah, but then really to get me going, I do think it has to be in this setting. How can I bring this setting to life? Well, that tool will do a good job, and we go from there.
So here's a question from Jeff Beeler, actually, and this confused me because when I hear Blackbeard, I'm thinking of the Richard Berg Blackbeards, and now it's obvious to me that he's talking about Hunt for Blackbeard, which will be coming along at some point from Fort Circle. It's Fort Circle, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much of a sandbox is Hunt for Blackbeard?
Not much. Okay. It is not a political game. It is a 45-minute, 4-move, 2-person hunt game, right? It's a deduction game. So the politics, and he's absolutely right. The colonial politics going on in North Carolina and Virginia, and with the Crown too, swirling around and helping to determine the fate of Blackbeard in 1718 is absolutely delicious. And so that is the environment, right? That those politics are important to what you are doing and can do in Hunt for Blackbeard, but it is absolutely not the focus of the game. You're not really manipulating politics. It's much more tactical. As Blackbeard, you're really trying to navigate that system to achieve what you need to do to be a happy pirate. And as the Royal Navy and the Virginians, you're trying to exploit those politics to get leads on where you can find Blackbeard to go capture him or kill him, right? So you're not really enacting those politics. You're either benefiting from them or suffering from them.
And it's funny that the Hunt for Blackbeard, that's your forte, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Hunting pirates? What?
No, hunting, like manhunting. That's your forte, isn't it?
No, that would be an overstatement. I was involved in analytic training associated with that, and as part of that, we did an actual expert in that wasn't me. And I'm the game designer. I've got the game design toolbox. Okay. We co-designed a game called Kingpin, about the Mexican hunt for El Chapo, the Sinaloa leader, and the first hunt from El Chapo, 2014. Then he escaped again, and there was a second manhunt. But anyways, the first manhunt, and we did that as a training game for analysts involved in supporting, tracking down fugitives. And in that design, I had sort of mechanical lessons learned that I thought I want to apply to an earlier historical case, and the hunt and Blackbeard's basically the Virginian-sponsored Royal Navy hunt for Blackbeard in North Carolina that culminated in success, and his death in November 1718 was a great story that I said, oh yeah, we can do this. Now, Hunt for Blackbeard is a very, very different game mechanically than Kingpin was, but that's the genesis, if you will.
We got a great question here from Frank Davis that I'm going to legendary designer Frank Davis. Frank's now turning red at that.
Hi, Frank.
But I'm going to kind of reframe this, because this is a thing that I think a lot of us in the hobby struggle with, right? Is the shelf of shame, and we have so many unplayed games versus games that we play. To what extent does actual play like drive sales or adoption of games, right? It seems like they're rather loosely correlated to me, and maybe we just accept that that's the way it is, that we're going to buy more stuff than we can play, because I do. But is there a sort of deeper insight there as to why that seems to be the case, right? I mean, certainly I'll grab a game about an interesting topic that I don't have anything else on, right? Whether I get that to the table anytime soon is entirely another question.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and I don't have the answer in terms of driving sales. That would be a good question for somebody who runs a game company and tries to survey and get statistics on that kind of thing.
Tune in 2 weeks, folks.
Yeah. So I don't know about that. But what's interesting to me is to compare and contrast this medium of commercial board games and war games and historical simulations in particular with other media and sales. And I kind of ponder, why are we so fixated on this issue of how much we play or not? Is it why should I be ashamed of anything? I purchase an object. I purchase an object. It's much less expensive than, say, a painting or a motorcycle or whatever. I enjoy it and I put it on my shelf. What is that? Is there something inherently wrong with that? What it might point to is actually, if we look at it, look at it glass half full. You get a book or you buy a game, or you go see a movie. Maybe the game is more expensive, maybe it's not, depends, right? You could say, if I don't read this book, I haven't really delved into it at all. If I have read the whole book, I've pretty much taken it in. I could go maybe research some notes about it or critical discussion about it or whatever. But what's it there? The object I bought, I've pretty much experienced it, right? I could repeat. That's about it. With a game, I could just read the rules, and I'm already doing something similar that I've done with reading a book, but I've hardly experienced everything there is to experience, right? I can run my finger. So I am like, I think many of us, I like to get the thing so I can run my fingers through it. And I might never end up playing it. I might be curious how they wrote the rule book, right? How did they do this? They did this topic. How did the designer, represent this? Because I don't know how I would do it, and I want to go see that. But then I still have all of that potential exploration of that product for the same price to play it, and not just once. Maybe I'm going to end up playing it 30 times, right? It seems like games just offer so much more in a single, not all that expensive object compared to other media, right? And so we say, well, we can't experience all that each of these has to offer fully because we don't have the time. That's not a bad thing about us. That's a great thing about this medium.
True.
And I love this from Jason W. Shelf of Opportunity, and I'm totally stealing that.
Yeah, that's
totally stealing that.
So, Volko, how many games do you have?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not.
Please tell me it's more than me.
I don't know. I'm not a collector. I haven't cataloged it. I will tell you, I've actually done calls where I had closet full of old stuff. And I'm like, there's very few games in here that I would with good conscience even put up for auction, because I wouldn't recommend them to my friends, And I went through one of these, I cleaned out a whole closet and I put it all in my dumpster, my trash bin. And I told my friend at work who was a gamer, and he says, what? Let's drive. I'll take them. So we drove back to my house and we pulled them all out and put them in his trunk. And I told him, just one condition, you're not allowed to bring any of these back. So I don't have a humongous volume, but I buy them quite freely because for me, it's like I say, I like to explore and delve into them, and I never know what I'm going to want to play. And very often it's like, okay, let's go ahead and try this. Yeah, I've got that. And off we go. And then there are certainly ones that I probably will never play again. I don't think I'll ever play Panzerblitz again, but damn, I'm going to grave with my copy that I played it in the 70s.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Anything other than war games that you buy?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, just an example. So I've been very interested, bouncing off of Hunt for Blackbeard, I've been very interested in how do games help with their mechanics to give players opportunity for denial and deception, for deceiving each other. And so what are the different mechanics that do that? And I've got an article on that coming up in C3I. And so just kind of researching that. So I got Fury of Dracula.
Very interesting game.
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
Sorry, what's the game called?
Fury of Dracula. And
who publishes that?
Nobody anymore.
It's pretty. There are 4 different editions. I think it's been around quite some time.
Maybe somebody redid it. It was originally, my earliest sighting of it was a Games Workshop. That Games Workshop version in the 80s.
Yeah. Have a look on BGG. It's got at least 4 editions because I think I've got the 4th edition, and it's it's been around for years, so it's got its following. And
Fantasy Flight. Where did Dan go again? Fantasy Flight Games apparently was the recent edition, 2015. So that's not that old.
But I think Games Workshop going back, but that's only maybe the more recent edition, right? It goes back a ways, and it's evolved a lot too. Actually, if you look at the different editions, and it's a hunt game like Hunt for Blackbeard, but very, very different mechanically, very, very different, and very, very interesting. So for me, I'm mainly interested in military history. That's absolutely true. But games are interesting to me if they model something concrete. Oh, there's an older one. Yeah, look at that.
That's a Games Workshop cover right there.
Yeah, there you go. And the something that they why is Carl's name in that?
Stolen from the Library of Carl parody.
He gives me so many games, and I said, I think I have that game, man.
Carl is a person of very refined tastes, and naturally, a person of very refined tastes and he lives around the corner. Apparently, comes to the conclusion, this is crap. I'll give it to Dan.
Yeah.
So,
he probably just got the newer edition. That's all.
That's plausible.
Yeah. So what interests me is how his tabletop models, right? How is this game and its dynamics taking me somewhere? And typically I like military history, so I want to go to some, war or battle or campaign or something from history, but it might be fantasy, science fiction, economics, politics, whatever. It could be any of a number of other settings, right? Then how a board game or a tabletop game, expresses that interests me.
John Stanley, thanks so much. Much appreciated. The support is much appreciated. And he, of course, I think says it in a different way than you did, Foco, where board games give us a way to get closer to the history in a way that a book or a movie doesn't necessarily. The sort of dynamics of it, which are much harder to convey in a book or film, right?
And that for me is the main thing.
And good as that upcoming Napoleon movie might be, it's not going to be Napoleon at Waterloo, right?
I don't think it's historically correct. That movie.
We're going to find out. We'll find out. I'll complain if it's not. So.
It might or it might not. But again, all we can do is sit and watch whatever story that movie tells us, right? And we might fill in with our imagination, and we might reflect on it, and we might discuss it. But we can't experiment, right? We can't say, well, what if Napoleon did this? What would happen? And we can't experiment with premises either. We can't say, well, they say that, the 12 pounders were what made the army, the most powerful. What if we changed that out and they only had 6-pounders? What difference would it make, right? We can experiment in a dynamic model, which is just, no end to entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And anyways, it's good that movie is out. It brings Napoleon back to life. So a lot of people are gonna be piqued by the curiosity of who the hell is this guy Napoleon?
Have you guys seen the movie Being Napoleon?
No,
I don't think I have.
It's a great flick. It's a film about the European reenactments that they have of Waterloo, annually, or however often they have them, and two reenactors of Napoleon who are competing for the position to be Napoleon at the, I think it was the 200th anniversary, I guess, of Waterloo.
Napoleon-off.
Yeah, kind of. And one of them, his name's Mark Schneider, is local to me here in Williamsburg. He's a reenactor here. And here he's an American with a French parent. So he's fluent in French, but he's an American. And so part of the issue that you'll see in this film is for Europeans.
He's more French than Napoleon. Yeah.
But he was very, very popular with the French reenactors as Napoleon, and he has the right look and everything. And but for purists, it was sort of like, well, we can't have an American being Napoleon. Anyways, it's a great flick. I recommend it about the reenactor world in Europe, and specifically about Napoleon.
I'm going to have to check that out, I think. Kevin Featherly's got a great, I think, tough question that I do want to ask. I've been trying to get to this for the last 15 minutes. And we just, the flow was not there. So I'm going to kind of, broaden this a little bit. There's a card. I have not played Wilderness War, by the way. There's apparently a card in it about, the smallpox outbreak. And, that's kind of a tough thing. Mm-hmm. An unpalatable thing to put into a game, but if the game, how do you approach that?
Yeah,
because you want to include the history, right? If you're trying to be true to the history, mm-hmm. I mean, one of the worst things I could say about one of the kinds of games that we play is that if it's not true to the history, one way or another, it might take the scenic route getting there, and that's okay. But how do you put tough things in? Things that we would consider appalling nowadays. How do you get those into a game and not have it seem crass or exploitative or otherwise dastardly?
Yeah. And of course, times change. Like what we might consider crass in 2023 might be different from 2000 when I designed that game. But backing up a bit, I'd like to unpack Kevin's phrase, toughest card in all CDG. I mean, that could mean it's tough because this is a sharp penalty that you suffer, right? That is, you lose these tribal allies. And what could you do to prevent against it? You can't concentrate. If you concentrate your force, the smallpox is worse in the game. But you have to concentrate your force to form an army to fight big battles, right? So that's the dilemma. And in that case, the way I approached it was, I wanted these allies were fighting, these Native American people, these nations were fighting for their own agendas, right? They might have been allied with the French or with the British, sometimes one then the other, but they were doing it for whatever their agendas were that were not the European agendas. And that meant that you could get into disagreements. There was a great book about that called Betrayals, about Fort William Henry in 1757, and how, both European sides and the Indians all had different ideas of what the rules of the road were, and you could result in having your allies do something you didn't want or just leaving. And so I wanted the players to have that feeling that it's great to have these Indian auxiliaries fighting in the wilderness, but I can't always rely on them, right? I have to draw the right cards to get them in the first place. Die rolls affect how many I get, and then I lose them. They go off. So the smallpox card is a part of a number of mechanics and events in that game that make you feel that. But as for the event, smallpox indeed ravaged people in that war, fighting that war, and especially the less resilient, because it came from Europe, I believe, the less resilient native people. That's reflected in the card. Smallpox also hurts the European armies, but it especially hurts your native allies. That's just historical. There was a bad case of smallpox at Fort William Henry. You can still go see the remains of the smallpox infirmary there on Lake George near the fort. This is not the famous case of the biological warfare. The smallpox-infested blankets at Fort Pitt, right? That was later. That was close in time, but that's Pontiac's rebellion.
That's purposely done, right?
That's purposely done, where there was smallpox, again, ravaging the garrison of the fort that's surrounded by the Native Alliance, Pontiac's people. And they took blankets from that infirmary, put them out on the walls as an ostensible gift so the Indians would take them and catch the disease. Okay, 1763. Okay, that's not this. So what is happening if a player is playing the smallpox card? So this gets to classic CDGs, in which you have events, not just by me, like storms at sea in Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, where apparently the Romans are apparently controlling the weather to wreck a Carthaginian fleet or vice versa. What is that? That's not what the designer means, right? That's not what Mark Simonich meant by putting storms at sea in that game. What it is gets to this. I'm kind of going on here, but the concept of agency and player roles and who do we really represent. And a lot of games, it's a game mechanic and it's an abstraction. Okay, it's a simplification. Instead of having random dice rolls hit you with bad stuff, we kind of give your opponent the ability to hit you with bad stuff at the wrong time, right? So that it's bad for you, right? And that's what the smallpox card. Smallpox is just happening. And if you drew the card, it's a bit of an abstraction that I'm giving you the choice when and where to play that card against your opponent. Okay.
So it's like using a tactical nuke.
Right, but it's not, because a tactical nuke, there's an authority there who holds the nuke and says we're going to use this as a weapon. Okay. As far as I know, we don't know of any case in the French and Indian War where smallpox was used as a weapon. It was happening to you. There's foul weather happening to you and so forth. I'm just giving that to your opponent because your opponent's going to make sure that it's very inconvenient for you when it happens. Okay.
And examples can be plucked out of history for things that seem to happen at the worst possible or best possible moment, right?
Right. And so part of the gameplay that is an abstraction of reality is, right, I'm letting you as the player be as crafty as you can to have this thing happen at the worst possible time and place for your enemy. Okay. All of that kind of skirts, I think, your question, Artie, which is, if there's something that seems tough in a human way, right? Like we imagine what you go through if you get smallpox, right? It's just terrible. It's unpleasant. And what do we do with, okay, but it was there in history and it was an important factor. It was an important factor at William Henry. It was an important factor at Fort Pitt later in Pontiac's rebellion. Do we leave it out of the model or do we include it? Because it does help I want to transport you to the French and Indian War, but I ignore smallpox, that would be a bit off too. Yeah. So this is a matter of taste, I'm going to say. My taste is for realism. My taste is for how did things really work and can I bring you there? And I don't mean in a way that's going to be unpleasant. I'm not going to actually force you to be cold or starve or get shot at or be maimed or catch smallpox. But in a pleasant representational way, I want you to be aware that that's what people are going through. That's a part of the purpose of the game. It's a simulation, right? And I don't know myself how to draw a line between it's horrible if you get smallpox and it's horrible if you take a musket ball in the shoulder.
Yeah.
It's kind of horrible, right? If you have a mortar shell go off near you in a trench, it's pretty tough, And the topic is a war.
Hold on.
Bad things happen. And I'm hoping that, like me, a part of the reason I'm interested in this setting is because it was so extreme. It was consequential for people. The stress was extreme. The stakes were extreme, so people did and suffered extreme things. That's a part of actually what makes me interested in military history in the first place. I mean, I don't think of myself as ghoulish for that, but it's the case.
If that's the case, then we're all in a
hold on, Volko.
We're all Vincent Price impersonators or something.
You said you phrased it that you want to show the smallpox, blah blah blah, the horrible things in a pleasant way.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let me try and put words in your mouth here and suggest that pleasant. I'm not sure Foco said pleasant, but in a way that people can digest.
What you're trying to be politically correct type thing?
No, I'm telling you
that would be.
I'm telling you,
totally.
If you see a card, playing card, you're playing a game for fun. You see a card and it says smallpox on it, and it has a little engraving, from the 18th century or something. And you play it on your opponent, and your opponent's units go away, which means little cardboard pieces are going from the board off to the side of your table. You all are engaged in a pleasant game for fun.
Oh, I see.
You see what I'm saying? I'm saying,
sick, man.
Right? You are. And so so I'm not proposing to make you suffer like people who got smallpox suffer. I'm simply proposing in this pastime, this pleasant pastime that we all share, right? To imagine.
Oh my God.
Imagine things that are indeed very unpleasant, but consequential and therefore interesting to us as those interested in history.
But it's funny, Volko, because someone like me would ponder that situation, and it would eat at me like, oh my God, this really happened, and the people are dying, and this and this, and I take it personally. That's my issue.
A lot of people will.
That's why when you said pleasant, it struck me.
A lot of people will point to that as the fundamental reason why they will not play war games.
That's understandable.
They think it's a topic that they don't want to engage with on a recreational basis. I think that's a fair decision for somebody to make.
It's
right?
historical. It's historical,
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're interested in the history, then we did unpleasant things in history. I mean, there's a couple comments in there in the chat here that I don't think are rude or intended in bad faith, but I kind of want to say something in that there is a question of topic and topical focus, right? Where if you have chosen a topic in which a particular thing that maybe not, let's take the smallpox as an example, right? It's not a direct military action or activity, but it was consequential based on the topic. And by topic, we're talking about not just the year that it takes place, the people who are involved, but we're also talking about the scale and scope of the game, that, how detailed is the game going to be in terms of scale, right? Are we talking about a tactical game, in which case something like that just may not be important, right? Or a strategic game, in which sometimes maybe that wouldn't be necessarily important based on the scale that you've chosen for the topic and what factors you want to focus on, right?
Yeah. I think some of this is also how we grew up, what we got interested in, what we got used to. I mean, I'll go back to Nick Karp's Vietnam, since we already talked about that. So in Nick Karp's Vietnam, is the U.S., you can declare a province a free fire zone. And if you declare a province a free fire zone, it gets a little red marker, says free fire. And now all of your airstrikes and artillery in that province are at full strength instead of half strength. Okay, so what is that simulating? It means instead of trying to be careful not to kill a lot of civilians, we're really going to go ahead and just blast anything that moves to get the full strength out of our firepower that is our edge in this war, even though we're going to kill a lot of women and children and farmers, right? That's free fire zones in Vietnam.
It's a consequential decision in that game, too.
Is Nick Karp's Vietnam a fun game to play?
I'm not sure fun would be the word I would use.
Are you in it for work? Do you get paid? I mean, I don't get paid.
Well, yeah, no, that's true.
Play.
So
I mean,
it's recreationally. Yeah,
it's recreational. Why are we doing it? Is it for education? Maybe. I mean, we're doing it. We're doing it because we're doing it with our free time. We're paying our money. We're spending our free time with our friends or alone playing these things. Okay. I presume we're doing it for entertainment.
Are we sick in the head or what?
No, we're interested in history.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm always going to push back on that. I'm going to say no. I mean, we're not.
Like, are we masochists, man?
I don't think so either. But you do what you want to do in your own free time. That's cool. I don't really care about your outside
We're not going to judge you, Dan.
No, okay. I'm just saying. It's
all okay.
And Volko,
he's actually not wearing pants. He's wearing a tutu right now.
And Volko,
but we don't judge here.
I don't know the game that we're talking about, Wilderness. I don't know, but when you use the smallpox card, is there any friendly fire with that card? You know what I'm trying to say?
Is there are you asking if there's a downside to playing it?
Meaning that if you're playing it, will it affect you?
Right. No. The only downside is you're not doing something else with that card. And so it's a pretty limited, I mean, it's like it's like an event that happens, it's part of the environment, if you will. I could have, if I had thought of it, I could have said, well, once you do that, it starts spreading, and your army also gets smallpox from your enemy and stuff like that. It's not that big a part of the game. So I didn't do that, but one could, and you could certainly, this is a cool thing about our hobby, isn't it? Grab a pencil, jot a few notes in the rule book, and you can do it. You can change that rule to however you please.
Your game now, you play.
Yeah.
Do what you want. And I will correct me if this is wrong, because you've clearly played more of Nick Karp's Vietnam than I have, which is not zero, but it ain't much. I believe declaring provinces free fire areas has a significant downside in that game, right? At least if you're playing the campaign. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, because appropriately, if you play the campaign, as you mentioned, you're really fighting for the political sympathies, province by province. Mm-hmm. And if the U.S. free world allies declare free fire in a zone, you get a penalty, like a -2 die roll modifier or something like that, when you're rolling for how much does the population there change its support towards you or away from you. So you absolutely have that political penalty, which is an important lesson. My point was, nevertheless, I found myself, and I've seen other players, you're declaring free fire zones, right? And you're doing it. And what you're thinking about when you're doing it is, I'm going to be more effective in killing VC units here, or fighting the NVA there. And you might do it in a province that hates you already anyway, right? This is, by the way, there's a similar, a related mechanic in Fire of the Lake for this. But if the province already hates me, I may as well kill the communists there, right? That's playing itself out in the incentives built into Nick Karp's model in the game, which is interesting. It gives us insight. And I hope then you start thinking about, well, what is a free fire zone, and why is there a -2 DRM for popular support, and why does it help me with you see what I'm saying? It's an entryway to thinking potentially seriously, even though we're doing it for entertainment, thinking potentially seriously about that dynamic in history and how it worked and what it meant.
All right, folks. Volko, thanks for answering that question. I think that was but that's kind of an on-the-spot question, and we're not crossfire here, right? So,
my pleasure.
But I appreciate your answer, which I think was a good answer, and I have a lot of overlap in agreement there, even if Dan is very angry right now.
No, I'm not angry.
He's just thinking about the fabulous post-show experience sitting on his toilet.
No, I'm just thinking, Volko, you're such a beautiful person. It's unbelievable.
That's sweet.
No, but really,
weird, really and possibly creepy.
No, the thing is that, I mean, Volko, He's a smart guy, so I'm a little bit intimidated. Never do I feel intimidated once I'm on with this guy. You're beautiful. You're beautiful.
All right. So once again, Volko, thanks for coming by tonight. We will absolutely invite you to come back at some point where you can endure another 10-minute conversation about Dan's amazing blenderific super toilet. And the rest of us can do so as well again. So everybody else, thanks for watching. Thumbs up the video, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Big move. Big win. The moose is loose. Big move. Big win. The moose is loose. Big move. Big win. The moose is loose. Big. Big. Big.